Hello, children. Welcome to my English class. Today I'm here with the chapter The Unsinkable Ship from Class 4 Gulmohar Reader. This is the story, a real story of a very large ship, Titanic. You must be knowing this story. There's a movie also based on this story, The Titanic. The ship sank when it had more than 2,000 passengers in it. It was a very, very big tragedy that happened. Now, without wasting much time, let's read the story. On 10th April 1912, the largest luxury ship in the world set sail from Southampton in England to New York. She was called the Titanic. The word Titanic means huge. Now, this incident about which it is mentioned in the story, this incident took place on 10th April 1912 when the largest luxury ship in the world was sailing from Southampton in England to New York. The ship was called the Titanic. The name of the ship was the Titanic, which means huge. It was named the Titanic because it was the largest ship in the world. This was her maiden voyage. What is a maiden voyage? Maiden voyage is the first voyage. This was her first journey. She set out to cross the Atlantic Ocean and she carried more than 2,000 passengers. The Titanic was like a floating town. जैसे एक छोटा सा टाउन होता है जिसमें सारी फैसिलिटीज़ होती हैं, उसी तरह से ये एक छोटा सा टाउन था. The Titanic, it was like a floating town, like a town which is floating. And it had more than 2,000 passengers when the ship was traveling for her first voyage. Everyone called the Titanic the finest ship in the world. Everyone was proud of her. She was as tall as a building with 15 stories. Imagine, the ship was so tall as you have seen a building with 15 stories. कितनी बड़ी होती है एक building जिसकी 15 stories होती हैं, उतनी ही tall थी ये ship. And everyone was very, very proud because they thought it was the finest ship in the world. Inside, she was like a large hotel with grand staircases, dining rooms, shops and swimming pools. एक बड़े से होटल की तरह थी अंदर से वो. शिप के अंदर ही बहुत सारे बड़े बड़े staircases थे. There were dining rooms, like the dining rooms are there in the hotel now. So there were dining rooms, there were shops and there were swimming pools inside the ship. Everyone thought that the Titanic could never sink. They called her the Unsinkable Ship. The ship's builders were so sure of this that they put a very few lifeboats on the ship. अब सभी सोच रहे थे कि ये टाइटैनिक जो है, it is the finest ship in the world and it could never sink. ये तो कभी डूब ही नहीं सकती. इसीलिए उसका क्या कहा जाता था? It was called the Unsinkable Ship. Those who had built the ship, the builders of the ship, they were very sure that the ship could never sink. So they placed very little lifeboats on the ship. What are lifeboats? Lifeboats are small boats which are kept on the ship to carry the passengers and save them in case the ship sinks. But the shipbuilders were very sure that this ship could never sink, so they placed very little lifeboats on the ship. The journey was very comfortable. Now the journey started. The passengers were proud because they were traveling in the best ship in the world. They felt safe. The passengers were very, very happy because they were traveling in the finest ship in the world and they thought that the ship would never sink, so they felt safe. They were very comfortable and safe. Then came the night of 14th April. The sky was clear and the sea was calm. Many of the passengers were asleep. Then came the worst night of 14th April. The passengers were very calm, they were very happy, they were satisfied that they were traveling in one of the best ship of the world. So many of the passengers were sleeping because the sky was clear. कोई भी खतरा नहीं था ship को. The weather was clear and the sea was calm, so the passengers were safe and sound. Captain Smith knew that there were icebergs nearby. So he told a man to keep watch from the top of the ship. अब एटलांटा में ट्रैवल कर रहे थे, एटलांटा को क्रॉस कर रहे थे, एटलांटिक ओशन को. तो जो कैप्टन था शिप का, कैप्टन स्मिथ, ही न्यू कि बहुत सारे आइसबर्ग्स रहते हैं सी में. Icebergs are huge masses of ice which float in the sea. Atlantic sea ocean is a very cold place. It is a very cold ocean. So they knew that there would be icebergs in the ocean. So Captain Smith had told one of the men to keep watch from the top of the Titanic. Suddenly, at 11:40 p.m., the man saw something. He grew cold with fear. 11:40 at night, the man who was told to keep a watch on the sea, he saw something. वो इतना डर गया उसे देखकर कि वो डर से ठंडा हो गया. He went cold with fear. A huge iceberg stood right in the path of the Titanic. Iceberg, he yelled. और वो ज़ोर से चिल्लाया. एक बड़ा सा आइसबर्ग उसे दिखा, वो बहुत डर गया और ज़ोर से चिल्लाया, आइसबर्ग. Captain Smith fought hard to steer the Titanic away from the iceberg, but the ship changed direction slowly and her side scraped the mountain of ice. Captain Smith tried very hard to make the ship move from there, but the ship changed its direction and one of her side scraped the mountain of ice. It hit with the iceberg and it scraped the mountain of ice. A shower of ice fell onto the decks and the iceberg cut holes along the ship's side. Now when the iceberg hit the ship, it scraped the side of the ship and ice fell into the floor of the ship, cutting holes on the sides of the ship. Water began to pour into the lower decks. अब क्या हुआ, जैसे ही साइड स्क्रैप हुई, बाहर से पानी शिप के फ्लोर पे, नीचे वाले फ्लोर पे आना शुरू हो गया. मोस्ट पैसेंजर्स हर्ड नथिंग एंड स्लेप्ट ऑन. बहुत सारे पैसेंजर्स जो सो रहे थे वो अभी भी सोते रहे. दे कुड नॉट हियर एनीथिंग बिकॉज दे वर फास्ट अस्लीप. Captain Smith and his crew could not stop the water flooding through the ship. They knew that the Titanic was in great danger. Captain Ship and his crew, the group of people who were working on the ship together with the captain, they knew that the ship was in danger because they could not stop the water flooding into the ship. The unsinkable ship was sinking. कितनी बड़ी ट्रेजेडी होने जा रही थी कि जो सबसे बड़ी वर्ल्ड की शिप थी, which was supposed to never sink, it was sinking. At 12:15 a.m., Captain Smith sent urgent messages on the ship's radio asking for help. जब 12:15 हुए तो कैप्टन स्मिथ ने शिप के रेडियो से हेल्प के लिए मैसेजेस भेजने शुरू किए. हेल्प, टाइटैनिक सिंकिंग, कम क्विकली. देन ही ऑर्डर्ड द क्रू टू वेक अप ऑल द पैसेंजर्स. फिर उन्होंने क्या करा, अपने जितने भी वर्क कर रहे थे पीपल, जो जितने भी और लोग थे जो शिप में थे, उन सबको ऑर्डर किया कि जितने लोग पैसेंजर्स सो रहे हैं उन्हें जाकर उठा दिया जाए. A ship called the California was only 20 miles away, but she did not receive the Titanic's messages. Titanic ने सबको मैसेजेस किए, पर जो एक बहुत ही पास में बहुत पास में एक शिप थी कैलिफोर्निया, पर वहाँ तक मैसेज नहीं पहुँच पाया बिकॉज शिप का रेडियो जो था वो बंद था और जो रेडियो ऑपरेट करने वाला था वो सो रहा था. The ship did not receive the message because the ship's radio was turned off and the operator was also sleeping. Another ship called the Carpathia heard the Titanic's calls and sailed at full speed towards her. अब एक और शिप पास में थी, जैसे ही उसको आवाज़ गई रेडियो से कि टाइटैनिक इज़ कॉलिंग फॉर हेल्प, तो वो एकदम से फुल स्पीड से टाइटैनिक की तरफ जाने लगी. Unfortunately, the Carpathia was far away and she took over 3 hours to reach the Titanic. Now, Carpathia was not very near, so it took about 3 hours to reach the Titanic. Meanwhile, the Titanic was sinking rapidly. इतनी देर में तो Titanic was in much danger. जब तक शिप पहुंची नहीं थी इतनी देर में टाइटैनिक सिंक करना शुरू हो चुकी थी. The crew lowered the lifeboats into the sea, but there was only enough space in the boats for a few hundred passengers. As I told you earlier, there were very little lifeboats on the ship because it was supposed to be the finest ship in the world, and the shipbuilders were very sure that the ship could not sink. So there were very little lifeboats. But the crew, they tried to adjust the passengers into the lifeboats, but they could only they had only space for a few hundred passengers. The Titanic had more than 2,000 people on board. The ship began to tilt into the sea. अब बहुत सारा पानी भर चुका था शिप में और शिप धीरे धीरे टिल्ट करने लगी सी की तरफ. People began to jump from the decks into the ice cold water. लोग पैनिक करने लगे और जब उन्हें कुछ नहीं सूझा तो उन्होंने ठंडे पानी में जंप करना शुरू कर दिया. With its light still shining, the Titanic stood upright for a few minutes. अब बिल्कुल tilt होके सीधी हो गई Titanic. Such a wonderful ship it was. It was shining brightly. Then at 2:20 a.m. on 15th April, she vanished into the sea. और सबसे बड़ी ट्रेजेडी हुई 2:20 पर टाइटैनिक पूरी की पूरी सी में सिंक कर गई. About 1,500 people drowned. 1,500 people were drowned in the Atlantic Sea. Captain Smith and most of his crew went down with the ship. Captain Smith and many other people also drowned in the sea. The Carpathia arrived at 3:40 a.m. The ship's crew found the lifeboats and saved 700 people in them. The Carpathia arrived at 3:40 a.m. and they were able to save 700 people from the Titanic. They also found chairs and pieces of wood floating on the water. But almost all the people in the water had drowned or died of cold. It was extremely cold and many people had drowned or died. They could save only about 700 people. The Carpathia was too late to save them. The sinking of the Titanic made people think harder about the safety of passengers on the ships. After this tragedy took place, the people started thinking more about the safety of the passengers on the ships. They asked why ships carry so few lifeboats and why they turn off their radios. अब उनसे पूछा जाता था कि इतने कम लाइफ बोट्स क्यों रहते हैं शिप पर और शिप का रेडियो टर्न ऑफ क्यों किया जाता है. In 1913, it was decided that all ships must have enough room in their lifeboats to carry everyone on the board. In 1913 ये डिक्लेयर कर दिया गया कि जितने भी पैसेंजर्स शिप में जाएंगे, enough lifeboats should be there to carry all the passengers in case the ship sinks. It was also decided that ships must keep their radios working every hour of the day and night, and it was also decided that the ships will never turn off their radio at any time of the day. In 1985, scientists sent a submarine to look for the wreck of the Titanic. एक स्पेशल शिप भेजी गई 1985 में जो कि पानी के अंदर चलती थी. It is called a submarine. In 1985, a submarine was sent to look for the wreck of the Titanic. They found the ship lying in two pieces on the ocean floor. उनको क्या मिला? शिप के 2 टुकड़े मिले ओशन के फ्लोर पर. At the depth of around 4,000 meters, that is 13,000 feet down the water. Later, they took photographs of the wreck and brought small parts of it to the surface of the water. They took the photographs of the ship which was broken from everywhere and brought small parts to the surface of the water. There are many stories of bravery on that terrible night in April 1912. In 1998, the director James Cameron made a famous film of the Titanic's maiden voyage. It is a very sad film. In 1912, a film was made by the director James Cameron based on this tragedy, real tragedy of the Titanic ship. It is a very sad movie. Those who have watched this movie always end up crying badly because it's a very, very tragic movie. Almost everyone who sees the film leaves the cinema in tears.